Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are once again updating the power rankings for Survivor 43 following episode 7. And this was a good episode, or at least a good episode from a strict gameplay perspective, where it did lead to a somewhat interesting vote. Although, admittedly, the fact that the challenge took up so much time and the whole pairs twist that had been hyped up really led to nothing really felt like a waste of time that really limited what could have been a more interesting episode, but that's just my opinion. But as usual, there are 12 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 12, we have the boot from this week, and here we have Dwight. And this is a fitting spot for Dwight, as I always felt like he could have been an early merge boot based on him not getting too much content in the pre-merge, him not really being much of a focus, but also him not really getting his way in a lot of situations. And obviously, he ends up going out here in what appeared to be a pretty massive flip that involved Cody and Jesse flipping against the old Vessies, and Sammy flipping for some reason, but we'll get into that soon. And obviously, Dwight's game wasn't great here, where he wasn't really in control for a lot of the game. He obviously lost out on the Justine vote, and while he did get his way in the NECA vote, he wasn't in the best spot moving forward, especially with Cody having an idol. And from what we learned from after the season, Cody really targeting Dwight from early on, with him saying that Dwight was the strategist on Vessi. Although interestingly, Dwight still seemed open to working with Cody anyway, as he said if Vessi had gone to another tribal, that he and Noel were actually willing to target Jesse over Cody, even knowing that Cody had an idol, so take that as you will. And then coming to the merge, I mean, yeah, while he was technically in the majority at first, we did see Cody and Jesse being willing to flip on him. And you can question whether this was a good move for Cody or Jesse or not, but it still leads to Dwight being taken out here. And again, I feel like this was largely what I expected from him. I never really felt like he was a strong contender to win the game based on his lack of life experience, and me just feeling like Jesse would have outplayed him, and that is what happened here. And with him not making jury either, I actually find that interesting, as well, as I believe that this is the first time in Survivor history where the second person voted out after the merge did not make the jury, which again, I understand they didn't want to start jury in this round. They didn't want to risk a possible three-way tie, but it's still interesting that they still merged at 13 anyway, knowing that they wouldn't start jury until 11, but whatever. So again, on the whole, I don't feel like Dwight played the best game in the world, but actually I think he's the top rated player of the boots so far, so I think that's interesting and really speaks to how actively bad some of the pre-merge boots were from this season, but that's just me. But anyway, he's out of the game, and he's here at number 12. And with that, there are 11 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely they are to win the game, based on their edit and current game position. But at number 11, the player I believe is the least likely to win right now is Noel. And the main reason I have Noel at the bottom this week is I feel like she was obviously the most hurt by this vote, where she literally loses her closest ally here, and she's obviously in a pretty bad spot at this point, coupled with the fact that her edit doesn't really seem set up for a win with her, and I feel like through that, it kind of makes sense for her to be at the bottom here. Now again, this wasn't the worst edit episode from her from an edit standpoint. She obviously got a lot of focus during the challenge with her struggling to get through the net, and after that part of the challenge ended, we did see everyone trying to help her out, so again, that was a nice moment there, but really, she's at the bottom because of her game position, and while I feel like she can move up, especially compared to certain other people we'll be talking about in a moment, I still feel like she's unlikely to win, so I figured I might as well just put her at the bottom this week. So because of that, she's here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have someone who I felt like could have been a contender to go out this week, and I actually felt like they could have been misdirecting us to lead to this person's boot, but even so, I still don't feel like they're winning. But here we have Ryan. And again, I do have to give Ryan some credit here for surviving this vote as well. And considering I felt like he was going to be an early merge boot, it is something that at least survived over Dwight. And he did have the majority on his side coming into this vote. However, even so, I feel like he didn't really get much credit with him saving himself. He was obviously the backup target behind James at this vote, which isn't ideal either. And again, I feel like there isn't really much of a storyline for him to win. And yes, while he was in the majority compared to someone else we'll be talking about in a moment, I still feel like he isn't going to win the game. And because of that, he is here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and I did consider putting this person below Ryan, as this person did not get their way at this tribal by any means, coupled with the fact that I didn't feel like they were winning anyway. But again, I feel like they got a bit more stuff in their edit from this week, and plus I feel like they do have some more potential moving forward from a gameplay perspective. But here we have Janine, and again, I don't feel like Janine is winning the game either. Really, these bottom couple of spots are pretty arbitrary at this point, as realistically I feel like it's unlikely that any of these people are actually going to win the game. And obviously Janine had a bad episode here where she literally is shown handing off her idol to Dwight, and Dwight gets taken out with the idol in his pocket, and so she lost the idol, which is pretty funny. I'm actually find that one of the more entertaining aspects of all this. And obviously it's not great that she's going out with the idol, so I feel like through that she was unable to play correctly. But even so, I feel like it may actually be a net positive for her in that she again could float under the radar from this point, as she literally isn't a threat to anyone at this point, which is a double-edged sword, as on one hand she's probably not going to be targeted anytime soon despite her being on the outs, but also it does make it harder for her to make a move that would lead to her winning. Though to be fair, people like Sammy have been saying that she has been playing pretty hard, so who knows how well she'll really do moving forward. But again, I feel like it's that potential upside for her. Plus, I feel like she got a bit more content at the beginning of this past episode with her saying that she's lost Ellie and how she's sort of on the outs. That could lead to a storyline, I guess. But I still feel like it's not enough for her to win. And because of that, she is here number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8. And we have a pretty interesting player to talk about here. And here we have Gabler. And Gabler is not winning this game. I have been pretty convinced about this for a while now, and I still don't feel like he's winning the game. However, this was a pretty strong episode for him. He obviously wins immunity for one, and it's pretty funny seeing him during that endurance challenge where he's saying how each minute is dedicated to some person in his life, sort of reminiscent of Christian, from David versus Goliath, and him just going off and talking during this really long endurance challenge. Although I feel like that was a bit more fast paced than the Christian stuff where it's each minute is passing by, which is pretty funny. But then after the challenge, after he wins immunity, he gets his intro package here where he talks about how he's playing for these other people and how even though Ellie's out of the game, it does seem like they are setting him up for a storyline moving forward, which I was pretty surprised by. I felt like he was largely going to be purposeless in the edit after Ellie went out, as that did seem to be the main focus of his edit. But to the show's credit, it does give him a potential storyline for him moving forward. And realistically, I think there is a chance he can make it to Final Tribal at least. Now, will he win? Absolutely not. I feel like he's going to be seen as such a loose cannon that I don't feel like they're going to really respect his game. And obviously, even outside of that, there's a chance he could be taken out anyway. He could end up being the Final Four fire-making loser, for example. So realistically, I don't feel like he's winning the game, and obviously that's not great, but again, I feel like he got good enough content here, not just out of necessity, but also him possibly having a storyline moving forward that could propel him beyond him just simply being targeting Ellie the whole time. He does seem to be set up in that regard. So I feel like Gabler probably has more longevity than I gave him credit for previously, but again, he's not winning the game. And because of that, he's here number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7. And this person has sort of slid down since the merge for me. And while I don't feel like they're completely dead, I feel like it's becoming increasingly unlikely that they win. But here we have Cassidy. And Cassidy didn't really have much in this episode. And with her not having a great merge episode either, I feel like it's becoming less likely that she'll win the game. Now, obviously, she's in the majority right now, which is pretty good. And again, we do know from outside information that she has a pretty strong relationship with both Carla and James. That will obviously make her somewhat well positioned within the Coco group. But if we are to believe that Cody and Jesse are riding the middle right now and could easily flip back to the old Bacas, then we could end up seeing the Coco people being taken out. And I feel like Cassidy could be in a lot of danger in that regard. I could also see Cassidy as someone who could overplay. And yeah, we did see her like talking about how she'll be like this big player moving down the road. But again, with her not really having much checkups here and there and her not having much follow up to her storyline, I feel like there isn't really much for her to actually win the game. And I wouldn't be surprised if she's just taken out along the way with her either overplaying or people feeling like she's a big threat, which obviously isn't unprecedented given we have seen her being targeted before in the pre-merge. So I'm feeling less confident about Cassidy after this episode. But again, I feel like compared to the people we talked about earlier, I feel like she has more of a chance to win the game than those people. So because of that, she's here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we have someone who honestly is more similar to Cassidy than I gave them credit for before, as I feel like they're unlikely to win the game, but I also feel like they've gotten a bit more content than Cassidy. But here we have Owen, and Owen's such a weird case to talk about because despite him getting all the strategic content, he is on the outs. I mean, he was on the outs on the Ellie vote, of course. He even got a vote thrown onto him, probably to avoid a shot in the dark play. And then, of course, he's on the outs again on this vote where he loses Dwight. And obviously, that's not great there. And I said this before, I feel like his edit is very reminiscent of Ricard, which is weird considering Owen does not have nearly the same amount of control in the game as Ricard did by this point. But I still feel like he's getting a consistent presence from a strategic lens, like he's always talking about the game. And through that, I feel like he is being set up as someone who's just narrating a lot of what's happening. But I feel like at the same time, while he hasn't like been lacking in personal content, I feel like it's pretty spread out, and I feel like it's not really connected to anything he's talking about within the game. So I feel like his edit on the whole has been very disjointed to where on one hand it does indicate longevity for me, but it also indicates someone who's probably not going to win the game, and I could see him being an end game boot because of that. And while I feel like he'll probably recover from a gameplay perspective after this vote, I could see him being in the majority for some votes. I feel like the edit is just not there for him to actually win the game. Though again, compared to everyone else we've talked about, I feel like there's more to justify a potential win. But realistically, I don't feel like it's super likely either. And because of that, he is here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have someone who is sort of similar to Owen and Cassidy. And here we have James. Now, admittedly, James has gotten more content in the post-merge than Cassidy or even Owen. And I feel like James has definitely been propped up to a degree, although even then, like, it's not perfect. I mean, it's obviously not great that he was being targeted coming into this tribal, as the plan was for the Bakas and Vessies to split the vote on James and Ryan, with James as the main targeted, so that's not great. He's also shown finding the knowledge is power, which, why? And then he ends up telling everyone about it, literally making the same mistake that Geo made when he found the knowledge is power, which is completely ridiculous. Like, why is James telling people about the knowledge is power? And then we see like the Bakas and Vessies like exchanging their advantages to try to counter the knowledge is power. So again, James is kind of being undermined in that regard, though admittedly it's not as bad considering they still get their way anyway. And believe it or not, they still managed to get one of the idols out through them voting out Dwight, who had Janine's idol, but whatever. And I feel like James is still in a good spot within the Cocos. And I feel like as long as that group holds the numbers, I could see him like making a deep run there. But realistically, from his edit, I feel like there just isn't much of a storyline at this point. I feel like at this point, he doesn't really have much follow up for him, making people feel like he's the pawn, where it does feel like increasingly that he isn't like making the best strategic decisions in the world. And I feel like he's been a bit understated in the edit as well, to where he isn't shown dominating the game. And while he is probably going to make it towards the end of the game, I feel like there just isn't anything there for him to actually win. But again, compared to Cassidy and Owen, I do have slightly more confidence in him to parlay all this into a win somehow, which is why I do have him above them. But again, I feel like on the whole, his edit has been very lacking. So because of that, he is here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this is the same top 4 that I've had last week, where I feel like these 4 people clearly have the best edits and could possibly win. Though I feel like at number 4, this person probably has the most knocks against them after this episode. That does make me feel like they're probably not going to win. But here we have Jesse. And Jesse's weird because he was obviously a pretty relevant piece in this round, where obviously it's him and Cody making this flip against the Baka and Vessies, flipping to the Coco side to take out Dwight here. And on one hand, you would think this would be a positive, as Dwight was someone who was shown saying that he doesn't trust Jesse very much, and by extension, Cody. And Jesse does win the battle here, which I was expecting him to do. He does win the battle here against Dwight. Though admittedly, I feel like it was a bit downplayed in that regard. I mean, it wasn't really seen as Jesse's move to take out Dwight here. It was more so Cody's move, and Jesse's role in the episode is him just going along with it, even though he also says that it may be too early to make this move. And to be fair, I mean, he may not be wrong in that regard. I feel like them flipping on Dwight this early on is probably not the ideal move, as it could open them up to be targeted later on. And plus, I feel like they're putting their faith in people like an Owen, for example, people that are probably less likely to go to the very end with them. But again, we'll have to see like what happens next. But in addition, like the fact that this isn't really presented as Jesse's move, and even Jesse presenting it as maybe not the optimal move, and then going along with it anyway because Cody said it was the best move, probably isn't the best sign for Jesse either, and I feel like it could lead to Jesse being taken out later down the road. And while all this could change later on, I just feel like based on how the events here are presented and how the gang could proceed moving forward, I could very well see Jesse being taken out soon, and him just being set up for a downfall, which is a knock against him. And it's for that reason that I have him here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and this is a person that I have largely remained stable on in terms of my opinion of them. But here we have Carla. Now, admittedly, this was a cool down episode for Carla. Carla wasn't really shown as being that relevant for the vote, which, considering that I've talked about before how Carla has been really present in the edit, I feel like that's probably not the biggest knock in the world for her to take a backseat here, especially when it seems like it obviously wasn't really her decision that made this move happen. It was Cody and Jesse who were the swing votes here. So I'm fine with it in that regard, but I still feel like Carla is too perfect of a winner for me. I feel like she has been getting too much of a blatant storyline here to where she is being set up as the obstacle for the eventual winner to take out, which, considering who I have in the top 2 spots, I feel like that doesn't bode well for Carla moving forward, but we'll get to that in a moment. So again, I feel like this episode didn't really harm my view of Carla, but simply reinforce it for me. And it's for that reason that I have her here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and it's the same top 2 that I had last week, although this time I did decide to make a change. So at number 2, I did decide to go with Sammy. Now, I know people will knock Sammy's edit in this episode, as he did be part of the plan here, and it wasn't really explained why he ends up voting out Dwight here, despite so much of the content being about Baka and Vessi working together, and Sammy never really explaining the vote. However, I personally don't feel like that's as big of an issue, as I feel like that could easily be fixed at the beginning of next episode if Sammy just explains what happened, which, again, I feel like could be the case here. However, I feel like the more that I think about it, I am sort of still going back and forth on Sammy and whether he will win. I still feel incredibly confident that he will get towards the end, and I feel like at this point there's probably an 80 to 85% chance he is going to be at Final Tribal, which, again, if I am proven wrong, feel free to call me out on it. I mean, I am entertaining that possibility by just bringing it up, but again, that's just me. I feel like Sammy is being set up to get towards the end. It's just a matter of whether he can win, and I keep going back and forth on whether he can really win. However, after this week, I am on the corner of him being a losing finalist, as I could see him getting towards the end, but people not really respecting him. Maybe people feel like he's been hard to work with, and especially now that we are entering the jury phase, I could see this being the point where the editors could start to undermine him some more by showing him burn some jury members as they're being sent out the door, and just in general, people talking about how they don't respect him too much. So I feel like this point on could be the point where we could start to see Sammy being undermined more. That could lead to him being set up as the losing finalist. But realistically, I feel like this wasn't the worst episode in the world for him either. I mean, he still got a checkup before the tribal about how this is the start of the merge, how this is the first round of the game in which everyone could be vulnerable here. And that's a good enough confessional for him setting the stakes here. And with him voting in the majority, I guess that justifies it to a degree. But again, I feel like we still need to see more from Sammy to really know if he's going to be a losing finalist. Although, given the person that I have at number one in the episode they had, I start to feel like maybe Sammy could be that losing finalist. And we'll obviously have to see, but for now, I do feel like number two is a decent spot for him. And now, at number one, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 43 right now is Cody. And I did decide to bump Cody up to number one this week, simply because I could more easily see the path for Cody to be the winner at the end, even if he's against Sammy. Whereas I feel like Sammy could still go either way. Whereas I feel like Cody is someone who, if he gets to the end, he is more than likely the winner of the season. Now, admittedly, I don't feel like him taking out Dwight is necessarily the optimal move here. And while I don't entirely agree with Dwight's assessment of how Dwight is somehow going to be a shield for Cody moving forward, I still worry that Cody could be on the outs because of this, and he could end up getting into a spot where he might need to win out or really need to play hard in order to get out of a bad position. And I talked about this with Jesse, in that it could lead to Jesse having a downfall here, but I feel like the fact that the episode presented the Dwight vote here as Cody's decision more so than Jesse's probably is better for Cody's storyline in the grand scheme of things, where it is shown that Jesse is going along with Cody. And despite it being too early for someone like a Jesse, Cody is doubling down on it. He is owning up to this move. And while it could come back to bite him from a game position standpoint, I feel like there's enough in Cody's edit to where we could see Cody bounce back from this, to where he could be this underdog moving forward. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's what ended up happening here. And beyond that, I feel like Cody's storyline is probably being set up for him to win, with him talking about how he needs to play hard and fast, and like us really seeing like his approach to life and how he's approaching the game. And for the most part, I feel like his whole approach about how he's playing the game hard like he plays life is being backed up here, where he has made some pretty solid moves. Granted, they haven't always been presented as the best moves, like him like grabbing the beware advantage right before tribal, or obviously with this move here by him like deciding to flip the vote against Dwight. However, I feel like the edit has done enough to prop that up while fitting it with the storyline to where I could realistically see this turning into a win here. And on the other hand, if it does turn out that voting out Dwight was the correct move here, and how it opens up like Cody and Jesse to work with people like a Sammy moving forward, I could also see that working on Cody's favor, and that he could just be in a strong middle position for a decent chunk of the game. So realistically, I feel like Cody is the person I feel the most confident about after this episode to win the game. And yes, while I don't feel like it's a complete lock per se, I feel like this was a good episode for Cody. And with everything else backing him up to this point, I feel like I have to give him the edge this week over Sammy. And it's for that reason that I have him here at number one. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now, obviously, I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings once again, so stay tuned for that. I'm also covering the Amazing Race 34 right now as that is airing, so expect more power rankings for that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave the link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.